MBA. To some, it is a goal to aspire to, a step seen as a critical advancement in organizations. To others, it's a goal already reached. And to others, and it's a long, expensive process filled with more questions than promises. Today, we're going to talk about the MBA, kind of. What we're really going to talk about is how to build the foundational skills taught in those programs without stepping foot in a classroom. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us live for future episodes on your favorite social media channel. You can get access to when these live streams will happen, and therefore interact with us sooner and learn from this content sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, which will give you a hint of the timing and an opportunity to join us. You can just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. And if you do those things, you'll be in the know, as they might say. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Master Classes, picked from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, I'm going to bring in our guest. His name is Nathan Kracklauer, and I'm going to introduce him to you right now. You can, if you're watching, you can see him. Nathan Kracklauer leads abilities, research, and development efforts as Chief Research Officer. He is the co-creator of the 12-week MBA program and co-author of a book by the same title, which comes out, as we're saying this live, comes out tomorrow. See, this is why coming early on the live streams is to your advantage. The book comes out tomorrow in February of 2024. He joined co-author Bjorn Bilhard's first startup company, Inspire Learning, in 2002, and was the principal author of courses for organizations such as Harvard Business School and the World Bank. Nathan has facilitated leadership seminars at major global corporations and at executive education programs at the IMD Business School, London Business School, and MIT Sloan School of Management. He holds a BA in liberal arts with honors and an MA in philosophy, politics, and economics. He was born in Falls Church, Virginia, but he now lives in Germany with his wife and 2 daughters. So when I said we were in different parts of the world, I was right. Nathan, welcome. Glad to have you here, sir.
Thank you, Kevin.
It is a pleasure to have you, and we're going to talk about this whole MBA thing. And so we've got Bill with us from Atlanta. And so if you're here, you can say hello, and hope you'll do the same. All that shows us is that Bill follows instructions. So Nathan, we have this book, the 12-week MBA. But before we get there, sort of give us a little more backstory behind the bio that I read that tells us about your journey. I often will say to people, like, you didn't wake up when you were 8 and decide you wanted to write books about leadership. So what sort of gets you to this place in time, in short version?
Yeah, I definitely would not have said at 8, I want to write books about leadership. I might have said I want to write a book, but not about leadership at that point, probably more of a fantasy novel. And I probably would not have said
too late, Nathan.
It's not too late. It's not. I probably wouldn't have said I wanted to write a book about leadership even 10 years ago, to be honest. But the path that took me here, I think one thing to explain is, why am I sitting in Germany if I'm an American? I actually wound up spending most of my childhood bouncing back and forth between Europe and the United States because my dad worked for the U.S. State Department. And so we were in several different places along the way, in Germany as well, most of it in Germany, but also Helsinki, Finland. And I did not come back to the States for any longer period of time until I went to college in Austin, Texas, where I did the usual 4 years of college, spent a little bit of time in Los Angeles, came back to Austin to get another degree in mathematics, actually. And it was on the heels of that I wanted to start my rock and roll career. But Yeah, rock and roll does not pay the bills early on, so I had to find a day job, and that day job wound up being with a company called Inspire Learning that was just founded by Bjorn Bilhart, my now co-author.
I have to
Uh,
stop right there because because last night was the Grammys, and we have had a Grammy-winning artist on this show. I'll put that in
no
the show
kidding.
notes for everybody. If you know who Maynard James Keenan is, the leader of Tool, among others, also a close friend of Kevin from childhood. So Maynard has been on the show. I haven't mentioned that in a long time, so sorry about that. So
No worries.
you got out of rock and roll, at least as a livelihood, and got
Well,
into learning.
yeah, it really it was the day job to work at Inspire Learning, where I was hired to write a course in business statistics, which was being used as a was going to be used as a pre-matriculation requirement at Harvard. So it was one of the earlier attempts at having sophisticated e-learning and delivered via web with animations and all that stuff. And I was hired to be the content writer and instructional designer on that. And I had the opportunity to work very closely with a professor at Harvard named Jan Hammond, who was a kind of a mentor to both Bjorn and me, and that sort of brought us together by virtue of that engagement that she had with us, that newly formed company under Bjorn. And then I proceeded to work at that company. Eventually, I realized I was having more fun and I was being more creative and had a better lifestyle doing what I was doing for the company rather than rock and roll. And I realized, I actually don't really deeply want to do this rock and roll thing. I mean, I love music. It's still a thing that makes me very passionate, but I could not see myself doing the touring life, even if it were successful. And it was at that point when I realized, even if I were successful at this, it would not make me happy, that I kind of gave up that dream and continued to work along with Bjorn. We kind of shifted our focus and focused exclusively on management and leadership development using simulations, actually, business simulations, computer-based simulations, multiplayer simulations, for the purposes of teaching management and leadership development. And we birthed a second company out of the first in 2016 called Ability. And that's where we are working together now.
And that takes us to where we're headed now, which is the 12-week MBA. Interesting that you wrote materials for MBA students in the traditional sense. I opened the show by saying that basically different people have different thoughts and feelings about the MBA, and so let's talk a little bit about the problems and promises of the traditional MBA approach. Before we get to your approach, I want to talk a little bit from your perspective, because you've been around this for a very long time. What are the promises and problems with the traditional MBA degree?
Yeah, so I should clarify maybe to begin with, Bjorn actually has an MBA and went to Harvard. I do not. And that's not due to any real rejection of it. I would sort of say wasn't really on my radar as something that I would even consider. I mean, I didn't even have a chance to not say no to it, so to speak, mentally, because it didn't cross my mind. So we come at this as very different perspectives. One, where he actually and loved his experience at Harvard. He got a lot of value out of it, and me with sort of complete indifference on the subject. Now, when we talk about the promises and the problems, the promise is, of course, that you are able through the MBA to learn what it takes to be a manager at an organization and take over responsibility at a higher level than you could if you were just entering maybe purely as an individual contributor. So that there's the value proposition of the content, as it were. Then there's the value proposition of getting the accreditation, which is very important. Then there's also the value proposition of getting into contact with a peer network of people who are in a similar place in life, probably have similar interests and similar desires about where they would want to take their careers, and that's actually a great thing to have, a network of people who are kind of like-minded and prepared also to help each other as they pursue their professional goals. And in some cases also pursue other goals entirely. Bjorn actually met his wife at Harvard as well. So he had
There you have it.
many different successes coming out of that.
Many different successes. So you make this bold claim of 12 weeks, right? Like, you don't have to, it really wouldn't even have to be on someone's radar. Like you said, it wasn't really on yours to know that you're not getting an MBA in 12 weeks. So there's something that is unique about there's uniqueness in your delivery. We'll kind of get to that a little bit later, but there's a unique sort of thought process about what you guys have created that is in both the program that you have as well as the book. And we'll get at both of those again later. But like, what's unique? What have you done to sort of distill it to 12 weeks, if you will?
Yeah. And so I think that is one of the major contributions of the book and the program, that our approach is not to skim lightly and just say, oh, each and every subject of the traditional MBA is not rocket science, and therefore we can kind of float above it all and just give you the top 3 lessons from each, right? There are things, there are books like that, and they have merits also. And I don't want to say that's a bad way to approach it, but that was not what we wanted to take for the program or for our book. What we said is we want to focus on what's the most essential, in fact, what's timeless and universal, and go deep on that. So we're not just skimming the surface on that. And how do we, define what is essential? That also is a bold claim, I will acknowledge. So first, to understand, like, our process for that is that we have the personal experience of running 2 companies across 20 years, and we can kind of see, well, what actually was essential all along, and what didn't change from one company to the other, because they had slightly different business models. But meanwhile, what we were also doing then was we were delivering leadership and management development programs at major corporations. And so we would see how they internally, the people designated with the task of finding what is essential for their leadership and management development programs, what they thought those essential steps were. And it turns out
the customer's voice. What a novel idea, as it turns out, Nathan.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, and it turns out that they don't make everybody go through a basics of marketing course in these leadership development programs. They don't make everybody go through a supply chain management course or operations course. They focus on a few different areas that they make everybody that they promote or intend to promote into positions of responsibility, make them go through. So that gave us sort of the insight that I think that we applied then. So it's not that we sat back and just thought about it. It's just, what we observed.
Stuff you like to teach.
Right, exactly. Yeah. In fact, one of the things, as we'll see, is sort of the financial side, and arguably, I wound up loving to teach it, okay, but it was not what I imagined ever in my wildest dreams, not at 8 years old, not at 18, and much later than that. I would not have said that's what I want to go around the world teaching, but that is what I do, and I have developed a passion for it. But because I see it, I see what the power is and how impactful it is for managers to know, or rather what happens when they don't know how to manage a business from the perspective of getting the numbers right, creating value,
as well as the people. Like, those are the 2 big chunks.
And those are the 2 big chunks. Yeah.
If we take the traditional MBA, we've taken all of the contextual stuff out, the supply chain, the marketing, all of those things have. And again, you're not saying they're not important. You're saying we're getting to a core, which is why these 2 guys can make a bold claim about 12 weeks, because now these 2 things are still huge pieces, huge. But the book and the program is broken into these 2 chunks. Do you want to say, you've hinted at it, but say a little bit more about it?
Yes, the numbers and the people, and I left out the people early because that is an area that I would have been passionate about much earlier.
I had a feeling that you were heading there, so I went and put it up on the slide.
Yeah, and it's exactly right that the other topics that are covered in a traditional MBA are absolutely important. The question is, where is the best place to learn them? And the truth is, the best place to learn them is probably on the job. Um, if you go to an MBA and learn about marketing, you're going to learn great stuff. There's no doubt about that. But by the time you actually emerge from your MBA and get a job, a lot of what you've learned is already going to be passé because that world moves too quickly now. And B, you're going to have learned about marketing, maybe from many different case studies from many different industries and different companies. But really what's going to count is what your particular industry, your particular company looks like at that point. So you're not going to actually be able to use necessarily all of what you've learned. And then what if you actually don't go into the marketing department? Then that um, all that you learned about marketing is not going to even be applicable to you. So for that reason, there is this core that you could get to. Now, again, we don't want to say don't do an MBA if you're excited about doing that. It is a wonderful experience. But if you are in a position where you like the industry you're in, you maybe even really like the company you're in, but you're looking for a way to advance your career, and you don't want to go back to school for 2 years. I mean, there's a big expense of that, but even never mind the expense alone. The 2 years that you take yourself out of the workforce is another 2 years where, guess what? You're not actually building further expertise at your company, in your industry, building relationships in the ecosystem of that industry. And so there's a huge opportunity cost for you. And that opportunity cost is also paid by your prospective employer, because part of what they want you for is, your up-to-date expertise and the relationships that you've built over time.
So, I told you before we started the show that the best episodes of this show, in my mind anyway, aren't book reports, right?
Yeah.
And this is a different kind of book than some of the ones that we do here. And so I thought, well, like, what do I do? Like, I'm not gonna have you teach us foundations of valuations here. Is, first of all, we would lose some of our listeners, and second of all, like, this isn't the right format or to do that. But I am curious with this idea on the numbers side of this. In your work with folks in live sessions, is there a concept that is often misunderstood going in? Like, is there a sort of a red flag you would wave to people to say, hey, what you think about this may not actually be accurate?
Yes, indeed. And that is one of the things that I'm very passionate about, which I think shows in the book. In fact, a lot of the editorial process was taking some of Nathan's flights of fancy out about that. But I think so. The core idea is that when you're creating value, it's not just about making a profit. And I think our naive understanding, my understanding up to age, even, I don't know, 20, 25 or something, would have been, what a business does is it makes a profit. Well, actually, a business attempts to create value for many different stakeholders. But people basically get that you buy low and sell high. Your uncle told you that when you graduated from college, and it's good advice. But we also know that businesses like to grow. I think there's some misconceptions about why businesses are always trying to grow. So we accept that, but we don't necessarily question why. But I think the biggest thing is that value is also created by making the results of the company more predictable to all of its stakeholders. And then we're focused a lot on the investor viewpoint or perspective on that. But a company makes a promise to investors saying, we're not going to just have profitability now, we're going to have profitability in the future, and we're going to be able to pay out something to you or to whomever you eventually sell your shares of the company to, and the thing that we call dividends. And investors want to believe in that promise, or rather, the more they believe in that promise, the more valuable the company is to them. And so, strangely enough, or it was strange and counterintuitive to me, but a lot of what a business does is try to set investor expectations about the future of the company, and try to increase their confidence. So that really means that sometimes a company will let profitability take a backseat, even growth take a backseat to the idea of smoothing the results of the company in the present so that investors have the perspective that they will be smooth and continuous and predictable in the future as well.
I love that. And I think that one of the things that, as I was reading the book, I was thinking about is that even in smaller organizations like mine, that the more people understand some of these ideas, it doesn't mean they have to be able to create an income statement, right? That's not my point. And that's not in the book either, by the way, as it turns out. But some of these core ideas, another example being the understanding the difference between profitability and cash flow. There's a big one as an owner. I promise you that owners that don't understand that are probably still not owners. But the point is, I think that there's great value to understanding some of these core principles, foundational principles, regardless of where people sit in an organization. And I think the healthiest organizations are organizations where people have some clue about some of that, at least, and there's some transparency about what's going on in the organization around some of those things. And the more of that you have, I think the healthier your organization is. And probably the more likely you have people that are going to want to stay, which leads us to where I want to go next, because we don't have time to go into great depth on the people side of the bucket either, as I look at the clock. But there were some, well, I'm going to start with a core idea, one of the core chapters in the people side that I think you will have some interesting things to say. And the chapter, as I recall, is titled Engagement and Motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just talk about that for a second, because I kind of led there to say, if people have some better understanding of the business and of the whys of the business, which you hinted at in terms of value, then I think it's easier to create this engagement and motivation stuff. And I think that engagement and motivation gets a lot of discussion, and often is we don't serve ourselves best with some of that discussion. So what would you add or say or make sure people leave with around this really important topic?
So I want to pick up on one thing you said there that I think is really important, which is we could theoretically have written two different books, one about the people and one about the numbers. And that would have been totally okay in terms of how people write books. It's almost a risk, I would say, to try to write one book that includes both of those topics. But what we thought was really important was to show how these things are inextricably interwoven, interconnected. And it's sort of almost pointless to talk about the numbers without talking about the people. And likewise, it's not very good to talk about the people without talking about the underlying business realities that managers would face when they're making decisions. And so what you brought up then about when people know the numbers, they have greater trust. In fact, that's sort of the underlying message, I think, of the numbers part. The numbers part really is also about people. It's about establishing trust. We talked about how it is about establishing trust with the outside world, with investors and so forth, and customers as well. But internally, when people understand the reasons why decisions are made, then they are much likelier to be engaged and participant. And even if they disagree with something, still put their backs into whatever strategy is being has been decided on. So I think that this idea of numbers reinforcing engagement is very important. Of course, the chapter in itself is also about, well, what can we do as managers to ignite passion? And there's an underlying, theme, I would say, especially in those first 3-4 chapters of the people side, which is really that, when you're a new manager, there are many things that you would love to be able to do and aspire to. You would probably want to be a superhero manager. And that might be things like igniting passion and all that. But realistically, when you first become a manager and have not had the experience or the training, what you really need to focus on is not hindering people's motivation, not sabotaging.
Don't be a barrier, everybody.
So we talk about motivation, and we talk about the different kinds of motivators that people have, and we look at them both in terms of how you might engage them, but I think it's always more important to say, what could you be doing that might sabotage somebody's motivation? And understanding what their motivation is just as important for understanding how not to sabotage it as it is for engaging it. Again, if you've got many years of experience, I'm sure that you can, use the levers of motivation to like bring somebody back from being disengaged, and that's great. But I feel like that's sort of the master level,
That's
whereas we're
not
trying.
apprenticeship. That's mastery
That's not
level there.
that's mastery
Um,
level. Yeah.
I just make one comment about that. Is in working with lots of new leaders or leaders of leading new teams,
Yeah.
even if they're more experienced, is that all of us have had that leader, and we've seen a lot of mistakes that they make, and rarely are they making those mistakes knowing their mistakes, and yet so these being a barrier, inadvertently doing things to demotivate folks or disengage folks are things we got to really be aware of, and I think that's a great thing. So I'm looking at the clock, and part of me says, Kevin, just go on to the back part of this interview. But I want to ask one more thing. There's something that you talk about in the book. Along with remembering the big idea of the book, which is that we can take out a piece of the core concepts that help us be more effective that are taught in an MBA program, and talk about the numbers and the people. And I think that's a really useful concept. The other thing I'm going to remember about this book is almost an offhanded comment that you make as a short section, because you put words around something that I teach all of the time, but you gave it better language. And it's this, and so he's like, is this a book report? I mean, is this a test? It's not a test. The idea is alignment versus agreement. Can you give us 5 sentences on this? Because this is a really important idea, and I think you guys captured it exceptionally well.
Oh, thank you. Well, first, let me say that the insight itself comes from a friend and colleague of ours, somebody who teaches some of our courses. His name is Jerome Bigara, and I've had the opportunity to work with him for a long time now, and he's just a fabulous person and a fabulous facilitator. So all kudos on like getting me to think about that in that way. Go to him. Now, in terms of what we focus on here, it's that businesses make decisions. They go left or right. They go for this market or that market. Teams make decisions as well. And so whether you're talking about the whole business or just a team, you're making decisions. Even if you are nominally the decider as the manager, you're never making it without, so to speak, involving a group. You need the group to get information. You need the group to execute. So for no other reason than those, you need actually for the group to be participating in the decision-making in some way. Now, if you're faced with a decision under uncertainty, then I think you have to acknowledge it's quite possible, in fact, that's what's implied with uncertainty, that there's a chance that it will go wrong. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a decision at all, really, if you knew exactly what would happen. So since there's going to be this space in which, a decision space in which something could go wrong, you're going to have to, you're going to have people who disagree with it. That's also necessarily the case because different people have different perspectives on what the outcomes might be, how likely they are, and so forth. And yet, if the people who disagree with the decision don't pull together and act as one with the team, then neither option that was in play, or none of the options that would play, could possibly go right if everybody's going on their separate directions. So what you have to be able to do as a team and as the leader of a team is somehow get to alignment even when there might be disagreement. And it turns out, of course, that the way you structure the decision-making process has a huge impact on whether you can get to that alignment or not. In other words, I might disagree profoundly with Bjorn. I do all the time. If he were here, he would nod very vigorously. But it's okay that we disagree as long as we in the leadership team of Ability and everybody else move forward as one. And if we have faith that the decision ultimately is made in a way that is acceptable to us, that is legitimate, then we can get behind the decision even if we're not in agreement with it.
Even if it's not the decision we would have made. One of the things I think is so
Exactly.
challenging for leaders in the middle, which I'm guessing is many of you listening, is how do I lead the change that's not what the one I'd have made? And I think the answer is the difference between alignment and agreement. And once we can understand the intention behind the decision, we could say reasonable people can disagree. We want people to be able to disagree, but we need to then we need to then align behind the decision, and it's much easier to do that when there's a clear understanding of the intention and the why.
Yeah.
And I just loved that, and I wanted us to go there. You might have thought, Kevin, there's better things we could have spent our time on, but hey, it's my show. I do have a couple other things I want us to talk about,
Please.
Nathan, before we finish. And I know that you've listened to the show, so you kind of know where I'm headed probably. My question is this. What do you do, Nathan, for fun?
Yeah, I think I covered that a little bit because I do still love to play music. I don't know if the camera shows it, but I've got guitars all around the room that I'm in. This is my home office, which
You mentioned
has a
rock and
library.
roll, but I didn't know if we were talking drums, we were talking vocals, we were talking piano, like keyboards. I didn't know. So it's guitar.
It's guitar, and then of course, since I don't practice this, I don't go out on tour or have time even to play with bands. I do a bit of home recording where I do a little bit of everything, and probably I shouldn't, but hey, it's my hobby.
Nice. I love that. And the other thing the only thing I think you absolutely knew I was going to ask you is this. What are you reading these days, or something you've read recently, Nathan?
Yeah. So with this book release, as you said, it's tomorrow. Uh, I've not got around to as much reading as I'd like, but I'm normally a very avid reader. And the book that I'm reading now, which is taking me a little bit of time, is called Owning the Earth. And it's by a gentleman named Andrew Linklater. It's a really deep analysis of the history of private property. And private property in land in particular. So I have an ongoing interest in the question of why is it exactly that we can get paid for already having money in the first place? So why is it that, having built up a surplus of savings, we can invest it somewhere and get even more money, even though actually the whole reason that we have the savings is that we already have more than we need to begin with. I I know that there's obvious answers to that, but it's one of those deep questions about how we organize society that I keep coming back to and thinking about. And I think it's always a good thing to re-ask those really deep questions that we take for granted.
Owning the Earth by Andrew Linklater. And we'll have those in the show notes, as well as in the show notes, we'll have more information about Bjorn and Nathan's book, The 12-Week MBA. Where do you want to point people? Where can they learn more about the book, about the program? We never really got there. There's a program that is that 12-week immersive process that this book outlines about. Where can they learn more about both the program and the book, Nathan?
So if you type in www.12week, so 12 WEEK MBA.com, that will then link you to Ability, our company's website, to the right place where you can both order the book, even order the book now as of tomorrow, and learn more about the program.
So you can go to Ability, ABILITIE.com, or it's probably easier to just remember 12 week MBA.com. Hope you'll do that. So, Nathan, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a great pleasure.
Before we go, everybody, there's a question I ask you all every week. And I'll ask it again today. Now what? What will you do with this? Maybe you got some very specific idea from something that Nathan shared that you want to take action on. I mean, it might be as simple as I want to get a copy of this book, which he and I would both find very lovely. But it might be something else. Maybe it gets you to think differently about the idea of an MBA. Maybe it gets you to think differently about your work as being about the numbers and the people, and there's some action that you want to take about that. Maybe you got some very specific idea about alignment versus agreement, or you got something to really consider in the area of engagement and motivation. I don't know what that is for you, But what I know is if you don't ask yourself this question, this will not have been as useful a time as it could have been for you. And the reason that we do these is to make them of great value for you. And the best chance for that to happen is for you to take action. So Nathan, thanks again for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. I've been looking forward to our conversation, and to all of you, I'll look forward to having you back with me next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Make sure that you let others know where they can find it. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Give us some recommendation love if you want to do that. You know how to do that in whatever platform you're in. Just come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.